Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, the bank that puts you first. They can meet your banking and financing needs for personal, agricultural, business, commercial, mortgages, and so much more. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
Virginia Tech football travels down to Miami to open ACC play, and the Hokies face their biggest test yet in the number 7 Hurricanes, who are undefeated and have looked very good to date. Can Tech turn things around in South Florida? We'll talk about all of that and more on episode 378 of the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. We're recording on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content, and for Virginia Tech students, subscriptions are free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company as our presenting sponsor. First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all of the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. I'm your host, David Cunningham, filling in for Giovanni Heater, who is on his way to Miami. To my right is Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way is Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. In the fourth chair is Tech Sideline's founder and general manager, Will Stewart, who, Will, where's the Kool-Aid?
I'm all out of Kool-Aid.
Nick Brown, our director of media, is behind the scenes producing the show. I think we all kind of know how this podcast is going to go. I mean, of course, we're going to be honest, but to give the fans something enjoyable to talk about, I figured we'd start on a fun note. Chris, what are some of your favorite memories from the Virginia Tech-Miami rivalry as a fan? Some of your happiest memories?
Well, obviously the 95 game, which was the first time Tech had beaten Miami, and that jump-started Tech to 10 straight wins. I think my senior year of college, when Tech was in the ACC, when Miami and Tech were both in the ACC for the first year, and Virginia Tech was picked anywhere from 7th to 9th in the league that year, and the last game of the season was at Miami, and it was a de facto ACC championship game, and Virginia Tech won it, and that was special for me as a senior. So those are probably my personal top two. I mean, you've got the Logan Thomas run in 2011, and you know there's a few in there. 1998 down at Miami was pretty special, but 95 and 2004 for me were the top two.
Any favorite Virginia Tech Miami games you've covered? Andy?
Yeah, any trip to Miami. I don't care about the games. I just care about the trip to Miami. That was the big travesty of them a couple years ago, being like, we're not going to play this every year. Now they're going to play it every year. I misstated that on a previous podcast. It's back as an annual matchup, but it took away that every other year trip to Miami. So it's back. We get to go down there, hang out on South Beach for a night, then go cover game, I guess, and then fly out the next day. But the first night is the important part on this trip.
Will, any favorite Virginia Tech Miami memories?
Everyone that Virginia Tech won. 95 through 99. Let's not forget the 09. Was it the 09 game where it was raining like crazy?
Yeah.
And was Ja'Cory Harris Miami's star back then?
And Dorian Porch came in and forced the fumble early. And yeah.
31-7.
Man, it's hard to believe Ja'Cory's that old that long ago. That was 15 years ago.
Jimmy Graham dropped the touchdown pass.
Yep. Then went on to NFL glory.
One of the ones I'll always remember is the 2016 game in Blacksburg. It's Fuente's first year, and that was Sam Rogers had a big night. Tech won 37-16 on a Thursday night.
It's funny nobody's mentioned in 2003, but
okay, that you guys can mention it.
It was an amazing night. But here's the thing: I don't really care about that game all that much. It was a great moment in time, but Virginia Tech tanked the rest of the season. So if it was one of those things like, okay, what nice night, but like, what did it actually lead to? I mean, the next week they lost to Pitt, they lost to Boston College, they lost to UVA down the stretch. Their only win after that Miami game was overtime against Temple when the Temple kicker missed an extra point. Like, that team totally tanked it down the stretch.
That was the give it to me Roscoe game?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
I covered that one. I think
great
it was
moment
in
in time.
Danville at the time.
Yeah, great moment in time. But like, that team tanked after that. So I can't actually view that one as like, it's not all that special for me.
2016, that was what, a Thursday night game, I
Yes.
think. And what did they have, like, they were banged up on their D line. Like, Kenna Canham didn't play. I think somebody else didn't play, and they still had like 8 or 9 sacks of was it Brad Kaya was the quarterback at that
Kaya?
point? I think it was. So that was an interesting one because you did not expect that coming.
Kaya was sacked 8 times. Virginia Tech ran for 251 yards. Gerard Evans had 259 yards through the air. Sam Rogers threw a touchdown pass in that game.
The Tech was coming off the loss to Syracuse, remember? They got off to such a
yeah,
great
that's right.
start. They blew out a bunch of teams, then like inexplicably lost to Syracuse. Well, I guess maybe not inexplicably, considering
I think there are
considering it's the Carrier
explanations
Dome.
for it.
Right. But then you come back next week and you're like, okay, now there's the team that smacked UNC and East Carolina and Boston College. And for the most part, that team stayed good like that the rest of the year, with one noticeable hiccup against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, that was the week before the infamous 39-36 Pitt game,
Right.
where the Virginia Tech wide receivers caught a lot of passes. Andy, you mentioned the Virginia Tech Miami series. I mean, for this to be back, to be a thing, everybody I think knows how important it is as a Virginia Tech fan. But what do you feel like it means to the league to just have this staple rivalry back?
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 of the premier brands in the league, and I know Brent Pry said it. They're doing their part. Now we need to do ours. That was his words about the Hokies. Miami's looked very good this year. Virginia Tech has not. But the league would be very, helped out quite a bit if both of these programs were humming again. I mean, they did the expansion to bring both of them in, and they've never had them both like great. It feels like at the same time, not like it was in the late Big East days, where these are like top 5 matchups when these 2 teams are playing.
Just those first 2 years.
Yeah,
it.
Yeah, it was there a little bit. Even then, they weren't quite on the level that they were when it was like, whoever wins this is going to the national championship game. And that's on both programs. And Virginia Tech has certainly faded since then. Miami, dipped a lot quicker right after that heyday there, where they were winning national titles, and then was kind of in the woods for like 2 decades. Every now and then they pop up like 10-0 under Mark Richt, and then it's just like gone again and back to mediocrity. So the league would be well served if both these programs were back and playing really well. And, at this point, only Miami is the one doing that.
There's just not enough big football schools in this conference, which makes it more important that all the football schools are good together. But that's never happened in this league. You've never had Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and Virginia Tech all good at the same time. And who knows? Who knows how much longer the league will last? Will it ever happen? Will we ever see a time when all those teams are good? We thought it was going to be this year, but Virginia Tech and Florida State have certainly not lived up to the hype. We'll see about Clemson. They've played much better the last couple of weeks. But, I thought it was interesting. You guys were in there for the press conference on Monday. Weren't some of the Tech players talking about how Coach Pry is basically telling them about the rivalry and how it used to be? Here's the thing: if the players don't know it, is it actually a rivalry?
Maybe. I mean, one of the guys who were asked about was Aiden Green, who's not played in it yet.
Right.
I mean, he redshirted the first year when they played them, and obviously didn't play last year. So with some of these guys, it's just they have to be introduced to it,
right,
because it's not out there. So, but it feels like it's maybe not what it was.
I feel like
certainly 15 years ago when going in, both teams are going to be ranked. It's going to mean something. And
right.
I'm trying to think of how many times. I know there was that game a couple years ago when Miami was top 10, I think, and Tech was pushing top 10.
2017.
That was a pretty big matchup, and ended up being a dud of a game for the Hokies on that side. But it feels like it's been a while since both these programs are just doing great, humming along, and this really means something.
Yeah.
So since 2004, when both teams joined the ACC, they've played 5 times where both of them have been ranked. One was 2004, Tech won. The next was 2005, Miami won. And then they played back-to-back years in 2009 and 2010, Tech won both of those games. And then they went a long time without both of them being ranked, and then 2017, and that's it. So you're basically looking at once in the last 14, 15 years where they played one game where both of them been ranked at the same time. Andy, from just the press conferences and stuff this week, what's your feeling on just kind of where the Hokies are mentally after this week of practice?
It's tough to say. I mean, you can put on a brave face in the press conference, then it's completely different at practice. I didn't sense like team moping around at practice or anything like that. It seemed like a pretty lively practice, a usual practice when we were out there. So, people always want to, do body language or, what are they talking like? It's like, that doesn't really matter. It's like, how do they go out there and perform? How they go in the game? And, can they come out sharp? Can they play four quarters? These are the questions that we don't really know until, get to game time and see them out there on the field. I think it's just tough sometimes to tell where a team's at and you don't see them in the locker room and how things are like that. So, I could venture a guess, but that's exactly what it'd be. It'd just be a guess right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's important to know that before the season started, I thought the limited amount of times we got to see them in August, they were really physical. There was a lot of intensity in those practices, especially that middle drill that day that we hadn't seen in a while. I thought the team was a step faster, and you got the sense that, okay, this is an experienced team. They're practicing faster because of it. They're practicing with more intensity because they're more physically developed. I mean, I thought it was one of the most up-tempo, intense preseasons I've seen in quite a while. And that hasn't carried over at all to the actual games. So it's tough, very, very tough to get that sense of things. And
also the intense practice is the Thursday one of the week, if I remember right.
Right.
The Wednesday one is maybe tailed back a little bit more instruction and scouting report type stuff. I think Thursday is when they kind of really ramp it up. Which I guess this week would be today whenever they do their practice. That was always Frank's thing. Wednesday would be our Tuesday. He'd always move it back. He loved to explain the calendar like that. But we don't really see the super intense practice out there.
Kyron Drones is obviously going to be a hot topic. Brent Price said as Kyron Drones, Virginia Tech, as Kyron goes, Virginia Tech goes. I know we talked about him on Monday, but after looking at film a little bit, after I know Brandon has had time to look at the film, anything extra stand out to you about kind of where he is, and do you feel like he's kind of in his own head a little bit too much?
He's in his own head, I think. I think that's a good way to put it. Teams are playing more zone against him this year. So last year when there was a little bit more man-to-man, he would take off when he didn't trust his initial read, but that's hard. It's harder to take off against zone defenses. That's one of the points of zone defenses is to stop mobile quarterbacks, and so he doesn't read zone well as a passer. So, and then it complicates matters it makes his running choices more limited, right? So, I think it's just a really good job by opposing defensive coordinators in the offseason of studying his strengths and weaknesses and applying those changes to their game plans against Virginia Tech. So they've got to find a way, because he's very hesitant on pulling the trigger on his initial read, and then he kind of hesitates and stands there and doesn't scramble like he scrambled last year either. So now that it's kind of like a baseball player, sometimes you'll see a rookie come up from the minors and he's swinging a hot bat, and after 2 or 3 weeks the scouting report gets out and they'll learn that he can't hit a curveball, and then he has to adjust to their adjustments, right? So Kyron's got to adjust to some of these defensive adjustments that I think opposing teams have made against him.
One of the reasons I bring it up is, Andy, you asked Pry yesterday about Kyron and just being in his own head. Where do you feel like that's a situation where maybe he is a little too much?
I don't know. I mean, he's hard on himself, I think, but he also wants to improve. I actually talked to his QB coach for a story. I'm doing his personal QB coach, not the one here, for a story I'm doing tomorrow, because he also coaches Cam Ward. So kind of interesting that he has those two guys as his pupils. Also Shedeur Sanders. His big thing was, he just sort of needs to hit on one of these deep balls. Something that goes like that, and he likened it to like a 3-point shooter. in basketball. Like once you see that one go in, like it just builds your confidence. Like, okay, I'm in rhythm, I'm doing it again. And he hasn't really done that this year. It hasn't felt like he's gotten in that rhythm throwing the ball. So, yeah, I think part of it is adjusting to how defenses are approaching him. I think it's adjusting to maybe sticking in the pocket more and trying to go through more progressions and get further down the reads that he has to make there. But I think a lot of it just is built off confidence and seeing one throw hit and put it in the right spot, and then you're in a rhythm and you're not thinking about it. You're just throwing the ball the way that you can. So I think that's what the Hokies need to get him back to doing. It's obviously easier said than done.
You wrote yesterday about special teams. We talked with Stu Holt. Feels like the Hokie special teams unit is better than it seems because of all of these mistakes. What did you make of what Stu said yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it's one big ticket mistake every game, and it's costing them points and everyone. But when you look at all the stats that they've had, and the special teams is not just one play every game. It's obviously a handful of plays across the entire game. They're actually doing pretty well. And I know fans don't want to hear that, but on the whole, the units are pretty solid. Now, if you can avoid that one just catastrophic mistake every week, which again, easier said than done because it kind of pops up in a different way. I liken it to whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, it's a punt block, it's a field goal block, it's a punt fumble, it's a two guys with the same number on the, that's a bizarre one that I don't think you'll see pop up again. But, it's something different that it's not like, oh, it's the same problem over and over and over. If that was it, you're like, okay, what's the coaching that's going on here? How are they missing this every week? But they've fixed those other problems, then something new pops up. So if they can avoid that, I think it's a special teams unit that can really help this team. It can be very advantageous for this group. They just have to avoid that major mistake.
Yeah, and it has helped the team. Like, think back to the Marshall game. Well, the Marshall game, you got it both ways. They allowed the block punt, but they also returned the punt for a touchdown for the first touchdown of the game, right? And
Lane fumbled last week, but he also had a 34-yard return that jump started the comeback there in the fourth quarter. So. Exactly.
So it's worked both ways for them. Their punting has been good. Their field goal kicking, except for the one, has been good. They haven't had any snapping issues or things like that. But yeah, it's just one little thing each week. But it's the perfect example that like all it takes is one special teams play to undo all the good you've done. They could arguably be 4-0 if they had been avoided special teams mistakes. But we'd still be sitting here saying, man, this is kind of a fool's gold type 4-0 because we still don't look the part and things like that. But I'd rather be fool's gold 4-0 than 2-2.
One last thing before we really dive into Miami. Seems like there was some positive injury news. Xavier Chaplin, he went down in the game against Rutgers, was carted off the field, and then only missed a 2-point conversion. He came back.
That's like the fastest X-rays of all time.
Right. Well, Price said that he didn't want to get carted off the field. That Chaplin's like, I can walk off, and the trainers are like, let's just cart you off, get the X-rays real quick. But yeah, that was pretty quick results.
I don't know how you do an X-ray that fast.
I'm not a medical expert, so I don't know either.
But positive news on the Chaplin front, and Bashal Tootin, running back, they were both in regular uniforms. Kelly Lawson and Ollie Jennings, they're the ones that are kind of in blue, and they seem limited.
Yeah, Kelly only played 4 snaps last week, so he's pretty limited with whatever's bothering him. Probably never tells us what's wrong. He tells us like their status and whether they're questionable. We'll go up to game time, we'll decide this, but he never tells you what's wrong with the players. So you kind of have to guess what's going on there. Jennings is the one that's interesting because he dressed last week. It seemed like he went through warm-ups, he was ready to play, and then did not get in for a single snap. And, the way Pry's making it sound, this could go all the way up until kickoff, whether they decide whether he is going to be good for this one, too. So I don't really know what's wrong. I assume it's some sort of leg issue. That's what's bothered him in the past. I don't know if it's a tweak of something in the past or something new or a hamstring or something like that. But, it sounds like it's going to go up to game time before they know. And, we've seen before that could be kind of tricky. Sometimes it feels good. Sometimes it doesn't feel good.
Price said no Lath Ganem this week, left guard. Kamari Copeland was in sweats at Tuesday's practice and had a protective brace on his left elbow. And the reason I bring that up is because it sounds like he will be unlikely to go. And that means the number 5 defensive tackle could potentially be one guy you are super high on, Chris, in Emmett Laws. It sounds like he and Malachi Madison, they're both traveling, Price said. One of those guys might have a chance to get a couple reps on Friday against Miami.
I was envisioning his college debut coming against a top 10 team on the road against an offensive line that goes 6'9", 6'6", 6'5", 6'6", and 6'6", and that includes a 350-pounder and a 340-pounder. Those are some big boys. But, yeah, I would be interested to see how it would go if he got into the game. I think, you know, when I asked players before the season, who's your standout freshman on each side of the ball, a whole bunch of them said, besides Quentin Reddish, their number 2 answer was Emmett Law. And so I think I would be very interested to see how he would do. I don't know if he's ahead of Malachi Madison or behind him or whatever. I don't even know if they would actually play a 5th defensive tackle. Yeah, they might just stick with a 4-man rotation, and those 2 guys are there, you know, as emergency guys. I don't know what their thought process is on that, because until last year, Virginia Tech never had a 5-man defensive tackle rotation. It was always a 4-man rotation. In 2008, it was even a 3-man rotation. So having 5 guys playing last year was something that doesn't happen very often.
This is a Friday night game, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN from Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. Miami is ranked number 7 in the country. I looked. The updated Vegas line is Miami by 19.5. The last time the Hokies were this much of an underdog against the Canes was 1992 when they were a 20-point underdog. So that kind of tells you where the 2 teams are at this point.
Did Tech cover?
Yes.
I think they lost by 19 in that game. Yeah.
Yes. No, I believe it was a push. I believe it was a 20-point line, and it was 43-23.
Okay.
Yeah. And that one is in Blacksburg. This Miami team is 4-0 this year. Beat Florida 41-17. Beat Florida A&M 56-9. Beat Ball State 62-0. And then beat USF 50-15. It's an explosive offense. They haven't given up much defensively. Chris, what's your just overall read on this Miami team?
Well, they haven't played anybody, but at the same time, when the lowest amount of points you've scored is 41 and the most amount of points you've given up is 17, you're taking care of business. Right? I mean, means you're mentally engaged. You're not overlooking anybody. You're just doing what you're supposed to do. Those are all things that Miami football hardly ever does, right? So I think Miami's on their way to having their best season in a long time. Whether they have a slip up or not, I don't know. But I mean, I think Ward is a legit Heisman candidate. They're a legit playoff team. I don't think they're like I don't think they would win the national title, you know, if they make the playoffs or anything like that. But they're very deserving of their ranking. And I think overall, both sides of the ball, this will be Virginia Tech's biggest challenge of the season. That's my overall take on Miami.
Yeah, I think they finally have a quarterback that can be the difference maker. I mean, this team always has talent, right? I mean, it's always talent's never the question. It's always like, can the coaching staff do what it needs to do with that talent? And can the quarterback play to the level that they need? And, you know, Cam Ward's been outstanding, and, you know, perhaps they've just, you know, I don't know about the assistant staff. I just know about Mario Cristobal and his troubles in the past as a head coach and, you know, game management type stuff. And you wonder, are they just so talented that that stuff doesn't matter? You know, did they recruit so well and their roster is so stocked that, you know, if Cristobal is not just the sharpest in-game manager, that's not going to pop up. Now, that's not to say either side really has an advantage on that, because I don't feel like the Hokies blow anybody away in that department either. But, yeah, that's why it just seems like it's a very tough matchup coming up. And, you know, I'm skeptical of Miami every single year just because history, looking pointed every year in history. But I'm starting to come around on them, and I'm starting to believe this is a pretty good team that can go somewhere.
So here's a little nugget. Now, we all know the transitive nature, transitory comparing scores across college football doesn't work. Now, that said...
You're going to do it anyway.
Because I did one on the boards a few weeks ago where Virginia Tech beat Georgia by 40. Yeah. You can actually trace that.
I'm going to draw a much more direct line. USF visited Alabama and lost 42-16.
It was closer than that, though.
USF hosted Miami and lost 50-15. So Miami beat USF on the road worse than Alabama did at home. Yeah. So just a little perspective.
That Alabama game was like tight. until the end too, and then they ended up blowing them out. But USF, not a pushover team,
Right?
And Miami handled them pretty easily last week.
Man, you are correct. That game was 14-13 at the end of the third quarter. And then Alabama outscored them 28-3 in the fourth.
Well, even the fourth quarter, it was like 5 minutes left, and I think Alabama scored 3 touchdowns after that. So
Yeah. Miami's offensive coordinator, Shannon Dawson. I thought it was interesting, Chris, that you mentioned who Miami's OC and DC are, and obviously we'll get to the defensive stuff later. He's a 47-year-old who's been a college coach since 2002, former OC at Houston, Southern Miss, Kentucky, West Virginia, Stephen of Austin, and Millsaps, 14 years of experience as an OC. And he mentioned Cristobal and just his coaching blunders, and I don't think anybody can forget about the Georgia Tech taking a knee or not taking a knee, I guess. But do you feel like this is, I mean, like what matchups can Virginia Tech walk into here? Do you feel like this is another game where it's like Virginia Tech's got to hope it doesn't get out coached? Yeah, like
I
how
really
do you view that?
I mean, I don't think Cristobal is the greatest coach in his own right, but I do think he's hired 2 good coordinators. You know, his first year was a disappointment, and he hired these 2 guys after that first year. So this is their second year there, and so their coordinators, I think, are good, very good hires actually. So I don't necessarily see that part of the game going great, to be honest with you. It seems like a fairly similar matchup to last week from an experience level between the coordinators. I don't know as much about Miami's overall staff as I do the Rutgers staff. But like I don't think that like even if he's got issues with in-game stuff as he showed last year against Georgia Tech, of course, but like it's going to have to be a close game before that matters, right? And that's what concerns me.
And Virginia Tech has a brilliant record, as we all know, in close games.
Great record in close games, yeah.
I thought was one of the interesting things you put in your previews. It doesn't matter how you break down this offense. This offense is good.
Yeah.
Two stats that stuck out with me. Miami is number 2 in total offense. That's the traditional stat. And number 2 in available yards. That's an advanced metric. Mm-hmm. When you look at this offense, I mean, it just seems like Cam Ward has playmakers all around him.
All around him. Xavier Restrepo was the leading. He had the best season in Miami history last year in terms of receptions with 85. And he plays in the slot, not exclusively, but almost most of the time. And Virginia Tech, Andy, do you remember Virginia Tech going with any nickel packages this year?
Marshall a little bit.
Yeah,
against Marshall.
They had Tech had. I think Strong was
inside.
Strong and Jones, I think, have both played nickel. Or maybe I want to say Tech used it maybe a little bit against Vandy and had Jones playing because they had Stroman in that game.
Okay.
But since Tech hasn't had Stroman, I think Tech did it a little bit against Marshall, but it was Dorian Strong. So it was Lovett, Delane, and Strong all on the field at the same time.
They might have to do it a little more this week because this guy's a dominant slot receiver. And you don't like the idea of him matched up against safeties and linebackers. But, they've got good outside receivers too, including a transfer. They've got 3 or 4 guys at receiver that can really beat you, and a tight end that hadn't been all that productive until this year, but he's having a good year as well. So there are options all over the place, and you've got a quarterback completing over 72% of his passes, and he's already over 1,400 yards in 4 games with 14 touchdowns. They've got a running back who, Damian Martinez, transfer from, Oregon State, I believe. He was a first-team All Pac-12 each of the last 2 years. Now, he hasn't gotten on track yet. I don't know if he's been a little bit banged up or if they've just been saving him because they've been crushing everybody. But they've got weapons everywhere. It's your typical Miami offense, except now I think they've got the quarterback that jumpstarts everything.
Are they this year's Florida State, where they nailed the transfer portal?
I mean,
this year's version of last year's Florida State.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Where they, that was Mike Norvell's thing. It's like he nailed the transfer portal, and now Florida State didn't bring in the quarterback. I guess Jordan Travis was a transfer at one point, wasn't he, from Louisville? But he had been developed over time. But the receivers that they brought in, Keon Coleman was a transfer, and they really hit on those guys, and those guys were outstanding. And it feels like Miami's done the same thing. I mean, Ward has been outstanding under center or behind center, I guess. Maybe playing as well as any quarterback in the country right now.
I would say so.
Martinez gives them something at running back that maybe didn't quite have at this level before. I mean, they've had some decent backs over the years, but I feel like he's like a surefire workhorse type guy. And, if you plug the right spots and you have the type of talent that they bring in all the time, I feel like eventually you do hit on it. And it feels like they've hit on it this year.
Ward is a beast. He started at Incarnate Word, tore it up, transferred to Washington State, tore it up. His stats through 2.5 years at the FBS level, he's completed 732 of over 1,000 pass attempts. So he's 66.2% completion rate, 8,400 yards, 62 touchdowns, 18 picks. Last year, he had a 48-16 touchdown interception ratio in Pullman, and he only has 2 interceptions this year. Feels like he's like a legit Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback.
Well, he almost went pro.
Yeah.
I mean, he did go pro and then changed his mind.
Yeah.
Didn't hire an agent or anything. So, I mean, this is a guy that was on the borderline of going to the NFL, and he's like, no, I'll come back. And it seems like he's gone into a great situation. And, man, I bet you he's making some money this year. I mean, you don't end up at Miami without making some money through the NIL thing. So, great decision on his part because his stock has gone way up. I mean, I would imagine he's going to be one of the first quarterbacks called when he does go pro.
When he was in the portal out of Incarnate Word, he was my number 1 target. So that was as soon as Brent Pry got hired. So we all knew Virginia Tech was going to go get at least one quarterback in the portal. And I wrote a couple articles saying I really want this guy from Incarnate Word. I think he's really good. And I think Tech did offer him, but it was like, yeah, thanks. And never really considered the Hokies and went to the West Coast instead. He's originally from, Texas. But I don't know where Incarnate Word is, to be honest with you.
I think it might be in Houston.
Okay.
It's in San Antonio.
Oh, is
San
it?
Antonio?
There
Okay.
you go. Damn, you knew that? Just off the top of your
just
head?
Googled it in 2 seconds.
There you go. Okay.
I should have said yes. I knew that.
But yeah, he never really gave the Hokies a look. But I can see now why he was my number 1 target, right? And I wish they had gotten him, but it is what it is. He obviously made the best decision for himself. But yeah, it's been a long time since Miami has had a quarterback like this, and just what the difference Ken Dorsey type can make in your program, and he's that type of player.
Well, like De'Aaron King a couple years ago had a little bit of that. And he got hurt.
Yes,
he was
did.
coming off an injury and stuff like that. I don't feel like they had like the full season of him. Tyler Van Dyke had moments, but he never really got there. I'm trying to think of some of the other
Ja'Cory Harris
guys
was
they
pretty
ran out
good, but
there.
not this level.
Who was post Kaya? Who did they have after Kaya? Because Kaya was like good enough to stick around, but like never good enough to like get them over the top in that department.
And then remember 2019 how bad their quarterbacks were? They just kept throwing Tech the ball in that game.
Yeah, that was a pretty bad one.
Yeah. Nkosi Perry.
That's right. Yeah, it's just that. I mean, that's a spot where you need to have a difference maker, and they finally have one. And he's really good. And I could sit here and say best Miami quarterback since, and I don't know. I don't know the history of Miami that well, but it feels like it's been a while.
I think it's Ken Dorsey, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
Malik Rozier was the quarterback after Brad Kaya.
Okay.
Yeah, he was. He had a little run there where he did well, and then I was like, I don't think he's going to be the guy there.
It feels like Ward's been the most consistent guy. One of the things I thought it was interesting was Monsieur Delane, Virginia Tech's cornerback, talked a little bit this week about like how important it is to not lose track of the Miami wide receivers because Ward just bides so much time and scrambles around, and he's not necessarily looking to run. He's more like inclined to find a receiver downfield, but Tech kind of in the back end has to stay with guys because the minute one guy gets open, I mean, that's a big play opportunity.
Yeah, he can get outside the pocket. He hasn't rushed for a bunch of yards in his career or anything like that, but he can run it, but he's generally going to keep his head up and look for people downfield. And yeah, there's got to be a lot of discipline in the secondary this week, and it's not necessarily the corners that I worry about there. It's what happens over the middle with the safeties.
Do you feel like this Virginia Tech defensive line can get pressure on this Miami offensive line? We talked to Cole Nelson earlier this week, Tech's defensive end, and he's like it's kind of strength on strength. I mean, Miami is pretty big, pretty strong, pretty physical up front, hasn't given up much at all. And this is a Virginia Tech defense that has the nation's leader in sacks, and Anton Powell-Ryland.
I think, anytime you have APR on the team, you're going to have a chance to get some pressure, but you can't rely on one guy. You're going to have to get some from the other players too. You probably have to blitz some to get pressure, and Tech doesn't seem to be a big blitzing team under Brent Pry. So yeah, I think they'll get some pressure, but I don't think it'll be like consistent pressure. I think Miami's too good for that.
We want to talk about the running backs. Miami uses multiple running backs, but Oregon State transfer Damian Martinez is kind of the main guy. You mentioned two-time first-team All-Pac-12 player. He averaged 6.1 yards per carry on the West Coast. He has 40 carries for 190 yards and 4 touchdowns this year, 3 of which came last week at USF. He has 4 catches for 65 yards too. They've got 3 other running backs, all of which are like 5.5 yards per carry or more. Jordan Lyle is a freshman. He has 29 carries for 233 yards, and he had a 91-yard touchdown against USF. Mark Fletcher is a sophomore, 21 carries, 121 yards, 3 touchdowns. Ajay Allen, redshirt sophomore, 17 carries, 143 yards, 8.4 yards per carry, 1 touchdown. It's like, doesn't matter who they put out there.
They've also got like a 5th string tailback who's, I think, their kickoff returner, who was like a top 150 recruit coming out of high school. So they've got kind of embarrassment of riches there. They've played 4 running backs so far. I think 4 guys have gotten at least 17 carries. But it's hard to say how that will break down. Like, those first 4 games were complete blowouts, and they were non-conference games. Let's say Virginia Tech, Virginia Tech's an ACC team. Let's say Virginia Tech plays a reasonably good game and is in the game in the second half. Like, what does Miami's tailback rotation look like? Are they going to keep rotating 4 guys? I doubt it. Probably 2, at most 3. Martinez, if he's healthy, will be 1. Who's the other one going to be? I think it's the bigger question mark, but there's plenty of options there.
Yeah, and I think what makes them so effective is, like, what do you stop? They're throwing for 400 yards a game. They're running for 200 yards a game.
Right.
It's like, if you shut down the run, it's like then they throw it for 400 yards in the game. Like, this is a very good offense with a lot of weapons, and it's going to take a total team effort to try to shut it down, but I don't think you shut it down. I think it's going to get yards. It's going to get points regardless of what you do. You just try to get in the way a little bit and make them work for it.
Chris, are you encouraged by any means with how Tech defended the run against Rutgers? This is a Rutgers team that only rushed for 153 yards, averaged 2.9 yards per carry. Menungai only averaged 3.2. Do you take anything from it, or do you say, this is a completely different Miami team that has weapons all over, and it'll be a different challenge in terms of stopping it?
Definitely a different challenge. I thought Virginia Tech answered the physical bell against Miami. Their physicality was better in that game than it has been a while. Caleb Woodson is your best example of like a really good game, but also a really bad game. He was really good against, maybe not really good, but much better than I thought he would be against the run, and more physical than I thought he would be. But, Brandon Patterson broke down Miami's play that they ran over and over and over again, and he put like 20 videos in there, and a whole lot of that was Woodson just not
Rutgers. You mean
Rutgers?
Yeah, you said Miami.
You're projecting what's going to happen.
A whole lot of that was him being out of position. Yeah. So Rutgers' run game is very simple. There's not a whole lot of action there. It's just a matter of being tough and stopping it. I figure Miami will probably be a little more complicated in what they do, so it'll be a different challenge this week. And is Lawson going to be more available? He only played 4 snaps last week. If he's not, then it's going to be almost all Woodson again. What's interesting is I think at the end of the game, when they finally stopped that play, not at the end of the game, but right when the Tech comeback started in the third quarter, they stopped Rutgers inside the 5-yard line.
4th and 1, yeah.
4th and 1. It was not Woodson in the game at will. They had actually put Caleb Spencer in the game at will, which he hadn't played before, and then they stopped the play. Now, it wasn't all Caleb Woodson because the defensive line got great penetration and knocked the offensive lineman back to the tight end who was going in motion, and that kind of wrecked the play from the very start. But it seemed to be at that point they were like, well, we need to try somebody else here at will for a hot second just to see if he does the right thing mentally, and he did. So we'll see what happens.
Maybe
with that
Caleb Spencer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spencer's Spencer's a former Miami
Miami
player.
Yes, he is.
So, will you have something?
Nope, just agreeing with you. So to add a little context to that play that Rutgers ran, if you go to my Twitter feed, there's a guy who included the 9 instances where Rutgers ran that play.
Brian
Fonseca.
Yeah. Guy who covers Rutgers, great guy.
And you can see the film. There are 9 clips, and Rutgers completed it 8 times, 7 of them against Woodson, 1 of them against Lawson, I think. And then the 9th one, was stopped at the goal line midway through the 3rd quarter or so. So check out my Twitter feed, Will TSL.
I had somebody on Twitter try to tell me that Tech did a good job on that because they forced the stop at the goal line and the turnover inside the 5. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, no, they won that because they had 2 turnovers inside the 5-yard line. Like, they didn't win anything on that play.
Brent probably would disagree with that.
It's just proof that you can type anything into the box on Twitter and send it to people and be an idiot about stuff.
We'll come back to you in a sec. The last thing on the Miami offense, let's talk about the receivers, man. I mean, Chris, you mentioned Restrepo, 85 catches last year. He plays in the slot. They got Isaiah Horton, 19 catches for 298 yards and a touchdown. Sam Brown Jr. had 62 receptions last year at Houston. He's got 14 catches for 173 and a touchdown this year. Jacoby George was a third-team All-ACC pick last year. With 57 catches for 864 yards. And then you've got Elijah Arroyo, the tight end, who's averaging over 20 yards per reception. If you're Virginia Tech, like, how do you defend this?
Well, you've got to play disciplined football is what you have to do. I mean, you can't sit here and think it's, oh my gosh, this is Isaiah Horton in front of me. It's number 2.
Yeah.
Right? You can't be sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, it's Xavier Restrepo. No, it's number 7. Not to get all Frank Beamer on you, but when things get big, you have to think small and focus on your assignments and do your job. And that's something Virginia Tech has done a very poor job of this year, though. So there's no reason to think it's just magically going to start this week. Another thing Brandon Patterson put in his article was one of Rutgers' touchdowns. And it was interesting because it was a run up the middle that worked, but on the outside, Rutgers had 3 wide receivers, and Virginia Tech only had 1 defender out there on the 3 wide receivers. So they couldn't even get lined up right on the play. So a lot's going to have to improve in a short week for Virginia Tech to play consistent defense against this type of offense.
And anything to add on the offense before we move on?
Nope.
Before we get to the defense, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all of the great content across all of our platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, including free checking. Visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Before we talked about defense, Will, you got some stat time with Scott Glessner.
Very exciting. It's the return of Stat Time with Scott Glessner. And Scott used to chime, back when we used to do the podcast, we used to stream them live over YouTube. Scott would drop all sort of stats into the YouTube chat. I looked, this is episode 378, David?
Yes.
I don't think we've done it live since like 275. So it's been a long time. So Scott emailed me some things. So this is the return of Stat Time with Scott Glessner. And it's been so long, I've lost the sign we used to hold up. So Virginia Tech has lost 3 in a row in this series. The Hokies have not forced a turnover in the last 3 games against Miami. And interestingly enough, in the game before that, the 2019 game the Tech won, they forced 5 turnovers. The Hokies are not a guy. Can one of you guys with a computer, I should have done this, look up and see where Tech is in turnover margin?
This season?
This
You
season.
could go to cfbstats.com for that.
The Hokies aren't a team that has forced a lot of turnovers for a couple of years now. Here's another thing to look for.
83rd, Will.
83rd, yeah, out of 134 teams.
Miami is 7th, by the way.
Really? All right, then. In the last 5 matchups, Miami has committed, on average, 10.4 penalties per game, 88.1 yards per game. So another thing for you to look up, David, how is Miami in penalties per game this year?
But they still won, 4 out of those 5 games?
They did, yep. Miami's won
104th.
Okay, so they're still committing some penalties. Miami's won 6 out of the last 7 and 8 out of the last 10, so it's really gone the Canes' way last decade. Virginia Tech has only had, let's see, that is not what I wanted to highlight. Oh, no, I did want to highlight this. Virginia Tech has had one 100-yard rusher in the last 6 games against Miami. And the reason I bring that up is I got a trivia question for you. Who was the 100-yard rusher? The only one in the last 6 years.
On 2 carries.
It is not Raheem Blackshear.
Well, it wasn't Herbert either because he didn't play in that
That's
game.
right.
He had like
That's
the
right. He
injury
missed
on the
that one.
kickoff.
Was it
so it's
In the
probably
last 10 years.
David, it's Connor Blumrick.
Connor Blumrick. Yeah.
He had 132
Ding,
yards
ding, ding,
rushing.
ding.
that was like the only yards they had in that game. It was,
I guess I remember. Well, I inserted a photo of Connor Blumrick
you
in
did.
your preview because that was the last time Virginia Tech played there. Yeah, Tech ran Connor Blumrick a whole lot in that game.
How do
They
I
were
not-
also running Burmeister a whole lot before they took him out. And he was having a big game on the ground, too. So they took out the guy who was running and throwing and just put in the guy who could just run. And then they didn't put in their NFL running back either. And still a 1-score game in the 4th quarter anyway.
Blumrick, 132 yards. He averaged 6.6 yards per carry.
Yeah.
A couple more stats. In the last 4 matchups, Virginia Tech has allowed 5 100-yard receivers to the Canes. In the last 5 matchups, Tech has not had a single 100-yard receiver. I was going to guess it goes back to 2016, but no. And the last stat, whoever has won the turnover battle has won the last 9 games in the series. Interesting.
Interesting. I do think it's interesting that you bring up Virginia Tech has not forced a turnover in like the last
3 games.
3, because that was a buy or sell question. Does Virginia Tech force a turnover? We'll talk about that in our buy or sell segment.
Yeah, I don't remember what I voted on that one.
So I don't mean to.
No, you're fine.
Yeah. So one of the things I do remember for that 2019 Miami game when they had the 5 turnovers was remember Alan Tisdale puking in the end zone. Did we talk about the Rutgers
No, we did
quarterback
not. No, we did
puking
not.
on the field at the start of the second half? He's jogging on the field before they run their first play, and he's just throwing up on the field while he's running out there.
What was so funny about that is if you go back and you watch the broadcast, they come back from a commercial and they show Callie Akmanis, is that his name? I think it was a bigger puke than the one that Tisdale
It was. Yeah.
I was like-
Tisdale's was like one brief spew.
I was like, did that guy drink a gallon of milk during the quarter break or what? And so they go to Mark Herzlich was doing the color and they had a discussion during the commercial break apparently and they asked Herzlich like, should we show that? And Herzlich's like, oh yeah, we're going to show
Definitely
it.
show that.
So that's great stuff.
I will just to give you a little preview of the buy or sell. Go watch it on YouTube after this. Only one person sold Virginia Tech forces a turnover. I will not say who that is, but only one person sold it. To talk about the Miami defense, this is a group that plays in the backfield, Chris. 5th nationally in tackles for loss with 34 this year. 1st nationally in sacks with 16. In terms of the Virginia Tech offensive line, how much does this matchup worry you? I feel like it's probably the best or second best D-line front Virginia Tech will see this year. You throw Clemson in that
Yeah,
mix.
it worries me a lot. The Tech offensive line at times hasn't been as bad as people say it has been, especially in pass blocking. But
like last week.
like last week, exactly.
I know all the attention is on Parker Clements in that one play, and yes,
Right.
it was comical, and he got pushed back in the drones, but that was the only sack.
Right.
And they actually graded out pretty well other than that. So Brent Price saying he doesn't think they played that poorly on the offensive line. He's actually being truthful about
I
that.
agree. When I went back and watched it,
That quote did not play well on social media. I'll tell you that much.
I'm sure it didn't. But when you actually go back and watch the game, and look at it with no emotions as you have during the course of the game when the game's going on when you're watching it live.
And Chaplin, dare I say, was pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, he graded out excellent in that game.
I agree. And but I think my Rutgers also remember going to that game. Shiano said, "I'm not happy with my pass rush."
That's true. They
Right,
didn't get to the quarterback at all this year.
Exactly. So Rutgers is not one that sacks the quarterback very much. Miami is. So this is going to be one of those games where Virginia Tech has to block better up front. Drones also has to make quicker decisions, or else there will be coverage sacks, right? Even when the offensive line does its job, he'll still get sacked if he hesitates. So that whole operation has to be working a lot better than it has been all year on Friday night.
Also, the coordinator needs to understand that you're not going to have 3 seconds back there to call a play.
Correct.
Like, you always, it's like, oh, well, give another second to develop there. It's like, well, don't call the play that requires all this time in the pocket because you're not going to have it in that game.
That's right.
Something I do think is interesting on Rutgers real quick, that safety, the guy who forced that rush at Parker Clements was Wesley Bailey, a guy who hadn't really played for Rutgers up to that point.
I believe he had been
that
injured.
year. Yeah, he had been injured, and he's like, I think their best pass rusher. And he comes in the game and forces
They got him and Tyreen Powell back for that game. So Powell made the tackle on the first play of the game on Jalen Lane, and I'm like, well, I guess we know that Powell's playing today. Yeah.
Some names to note. The first one I think is very interesting. Defensive end Tyler Barron, brother of former Virginia Tech defensive lineman Woody Barron. He has 7.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks this year already. Any great Woody Barron stories?
He was a really good player.
They kept trotting him out for media interviews all the time. He wasn't the greatest interview, but he turned out on the field. I'm like, when he got here, I think he gray shirted his first year back when they still did
I think
that.
he was one of the last great.
He was one of the last. It was like him and Seth Dooley, I think, were some of the last ones. And he was just kind of here for a couple years. I'm like, okay, he'll be like a contributor, not much or anything like that. And then like midway through his junior year, it's like this guy, nobody's blocking him. In his senior year, it's like I think he had like 16 tackles for loss or something like that. I mean, he had a really good first team All ACC senior year.
Yeah, 19 tackles for loss.
He was incredible.
2016?
Yep.
2016.
Yeah, he was incredible.
I have
Nigel
18
Williams and Tim Settle on that defense.
I have 18 and a half.
Yeah, it was a lot, and it just kind of came out of I guess to the staff, it didn't come out of nowhere because they saw signs of it. But it was like, wow, that guy really had a great year like that. So that's my Woody Barron's or Tyler Barron feels like. Wasn't he at Louisville in the offseason and then like left over
Right, he was at Tennessee for like 4 years, then transferred, and then
there was something weird happened at Louisville, and then he ended up at Miami. So
well, it's an interesting transfer anyway because I imagine Tennessee's NIL program is already pretty strong. So if you end up at Miami, then I think that shows you a little bit how strong Miami's NIL program is right now.
Well, so one thing I want to say is, so he was at Tennessee for 4 years, 2022. 23. He had 6 tackles for loss. Sorry. He had 6 sacks alone last year, and he already has 4.5 this year. So it shows his production is up, and he's probably playing more.
Do you know who their defensive line coach is?
At Miami?
Yeah, Jason Taylor, the former NFL All-Pro.
Oh, I did not. That's impressive.
And before you think Jason Taylor went to school at Miami, where did he go to school?
Akron. He destroyed Virginia Tech in that hurricane game in 1996. Anyway.
For the record, Woody Barron had 18.5 tackles for loss as a senior. Tyler Barron, his brother, is on pace for 22.5, which kind of tells you. He's got 7.5 through 4 games. Miami is also expecting defensive end Ruben Bain back from injury this week, according to Mario Cristobal in the Miami Herald. He was the ACC Rookie of the Year last year and only played 1 drive in the opener against Florida. Defensive tackle Simeon Barrow has 2.5 sacks this year and is very good against the run. And then they've got linebacker Francisco Maigoa, Washington State transfer, second team All ACC pick in 2023. Their defensive coordinator for the Canes, Lance Guidry. He's a 53-year-old college coach since 2000, formerly of Marshall, where he had the number 8 defense. He also coached at Southeastern Louisiana, McNeese State, and Western Kentucky.
Yeah.
He went viral on like a clip this week about an answer he made about defensive adjustments.
Yes, I loved it.
That was pretty good.
I should have put it in the preview.
Where he's like, if you wait until halftime to make defensive adjustments, like you're way behind. Like you've got to do it all the time. You got to do it when it's happening during the game. You can't wait till you get into the locker room to do that. I think Al Gross said this like a long time ago too. It's like one of the Al was actually pretty good with answers to the media, not with treating the media, but with his answers. They were pretty substantive and good like that. But it's, and then he went on to say, he's like, this is part of like coaching in high school really pays off because you're facing the wing tee and the veer and all these different kind of styles of offense. It's not this homogenous offense that you face. So you have to learn how to adjust on the fly to a lot of different stuff. I thought it was a pretty good answer.
I thought it was great. I think he said something like, okay, you go into a game prepared for certain things and you're not going to see exactly that, but you do prepare for what you see on film. And then you have to adjust early. And if you make the right adjustments and start stopping them, then they'll adjust back to the stuff that they normally do to what you were prepared for in the first place.
That's when they do
Right.
What you thought they would do. It's once you adjust to the stuff that they don't do.
I thought it was such a smart answer, such a good answer. Now, he was not considered a big-time hire when Miami hired him. He was making $200,000 a year as the defensive coordinator at Marshall. And it's funny, yeah, they had, what was it, the number 8 defense in the country?
Number 8.
At
That's
Marshall.
what you said,
They
yeah.
brought everybody back, and their defense got a lot worse in 2023. So I think that shows you how good of a coach he was. Like, it wasn't a bad defense in 2023, but it wasn't nearly as good as it had been the year before. So I think he's an outstanding X's and O's coach and can adjust and things like that. And it's a sign that, like, he was an experienced coach when Miami hired him, even though he'd been coaching at lower levels, right? I think it's a sign that, good coaches can be found at any level of football. It's just you have to recognize them.
Miami is 10th, according to the traditional metrics, in total defense, 20th in FEI defense. Really good against the run, a little bit worse against the pass. In your mind, how do you see Tech attacking this one?
Tech's got to run the football, but the problem is, I do think if Miami has a weakness, it is in the secondary. But look at Tech's passing game. 2 of the last 3 games has been below 140 yards. So even if it is a weakness for Miami pass defense, is Virginia Tech good enough to attack it? I could see the Hokies hitting a couple of big plays, maybe, if Miami gets undisciplined. But I can't envision any consistent success for the Hokies that doesn't include a successful running game.
Yeah, you got to run it. And that's their strength. That's their best player offensively right now is Tootin. You got to find ways to get him the ball and find ways to get him the ball in successful spots. That might not be traditional running if it's a lot of option elements or involve drones quite a bit and get misdirection going. That's how you really, hit it off last year when this offense was rolling. Didn't have the best blocking. You saw all the grades that they got even when they were running for 300 yards in some games. They schemed up some stuff that was very effective. And, I don't know if that works if you're just so out-talented on the other side of the ball, but you got to try it. And you've got to try to establish that because I don't think they can show up there and just like, well, we're going to throw it 40 times and win this game.
Exactly.
That's not the blueprint to winning for this offense. I think you got to run the ball and find that identity there and then build the pass off of that.
I think when you try to win a football game, you try to envision in your head, what does the box score look like at the end of the game if we win? And I think the box score in this game would look like Tootin 20-plus carries, Drones 15-plus carries. You got to establish that run, and you've got to keep Ward off the field, man, because if they can't go out there and string together first downs, if Virginia Tech can't go out there and string together first downs and Ward's on the field a lot, he's going to torch you. Even if you play a little bit better defensively than he had been playing, if you give him enough opportunity, he's going to torch you. So even though stopping the run seems to be Miami's strength, running the football is also your own strength, and it's probably your only path to victory in this game. So you got to come out hard and heavy, establish that run from the first drive.
So something I think is interesting is it feels like the Tech offense has gotten behind the sticks a lot. I thought Tech was maybe a little bit better about it against Rutgers. In a game like this, I feel like it is of the utmost importance that you don't fall behind the sticks early.
I definitely think that's true. I mean, because if you fall behind the sticks against Miami, then they can pin their ears down back on third down, and with their leading the nation in sacks like they do, then you're going to be even further behind the sticks most likely if they, because they're going to sack you some on third down. So yeah, you got to get it in 3rd and 2s and 2nd and 3s and things like that to have a chance against this defense, I believe. If you can get 2nd and 2, then maybe, you can work the passing game more. I would have expected at this point, we saw them practice it in the preseason, Colin Schlee throwing the football. We've seen him in the game. He started the Vanderbilt game, but he still hasn't touched the football outside of when he came into the game, when Drones got hurt against Vanderbilt. I would have liked to have seen them break out something with him against Rutgers.
He was out there for one play.
He was out there, but like at some point,
I thought they'd throw it with him.
At some point, you've got to hand it to him, throw it to him, and then have him throw it or something. You've got to use it.
What are you saving it for at this point?
Right at this point, if you knew the Rutgers game was going to be close, so that's the type of game you want to break something like that out for. They could break that out against Miami and then still lose by like 3 touchdowns or something, and then now it's out on film. But anyway, I do expect them to probably use it this weekend at some point.
As far as special teams goes for the Canes, Andres Borregales is a really, really good kicker, first team All ACC. He's converted 83.6% of his field goals in his career and was 22 of 26 last season. Lou Groza Award semifinalist. Punter Dylan Joyce is he was a true freshman last year and an All ACC honorable mention performer as a punter, an Australian, as many punters are. We talked about special teams a little bit. Is this do you feel like the tide kind of has to turn for Virginia Tech special teams this week? Like this is the week where there's no special teams gaff?
It better be, because like you need to win one battle this week to give yourself a chance. You can't get out there and say, oh, well, we lost the offensive battle, we lost the defensive battle, and we lost the special teams battle. Like if you can keep it close on offense and defense and then win special teams, you can give yourself a chance. But yeah, if you go out there and make another special teams gaff that hands Miami a field goal or a touchdown, Miami doesn't need any help, right? They don't need any help at all. So hopefully it's the other way around. Maybe Miami has a fumble on a punt return or something, or maybe Virginia Tech returns a punt for a touchdown. That's the type of spark Virginia Tech, I believe, will need on Friday.
Just to be clear, this is a different Borregales from their previous Borregales kicker.
I guess it's his younger brother. Maybe?
Yeah, it was Jose, and now this is Andres. It confused me for a second. I'm like, how long have they had a Borregales for a kicker? It just seems like it never ends.
I think this would probably be the 8th year, technically.
Well, the other guy transferred in, so he's only there briefly.
Okay. And there's a third one named Aurora. See what I did there? Aurora
Borregales. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I'll be here all week.
Well, I actually want to come back to you, Will. Before we get to our predictions, fill in the blank for me, Will. Virginia Tech will have its best chance to win the game on Friday if it does blank correctly.
Oh my gosh, so many candidates to pick from. Take care of the ball. Man, I don't know, Dave. I have a laundry list, but first thing you got to do is don't turn it over, man. If you do something like drop a punt inside your 20-yard line 3 minutes into the game, it's over. So that's where my brain goes first time. Is there a correct answer, by the way?
I'm gonna ask Andy and Chris the same thing. I mean, in your mind, if Virginia Tech's best chance to win the game comes from what?
I think they have to win the turnover battle. I don't think they can break even and win. I don't think they certainly can't lose and win. I think they'd have to be at least +1, preferably +2, to have a legitimate chance in this one.
Well, I'll take a different football fundamental for my key to this one. I'd say that run the ball and control the clock, because I don't think you're going to win a shootout with Miami. I don't think you want to get into that kind of game because they just have too much firepower on that side. So, an ideal game for them, I think you have the ball 35, 40 minutes and just keep that other offense off the field. Now, I don't know if they're capable of that, but I think that should be the aim in this coming in.
Well, Chris, what do you feel like is the key to unlock Kyron Drones in this one? Is it run it and...
I think he needs to have success first so he can build some confidence in himself. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to build confidence in himself is to run him right now. And I know probably people were coming into the season were like, we shouldn't run him as much this year. Yeah, you should. It's one of your top weapons. He's a 235-pound beast who runs over linebackers and safeties. You need to take advantage of that as much as you can, especially now that he's struggling passing the ball. So you get him lathered up a little bit, get him confidence, and get yourself in 2nd and 3, and then throw it.
Hey, let's go back to that a little bit in the conversation to the turnover thing. It made me remember the 1998 game down at Miami. You go back and watch that game, and there was NFL talent on both sides of the field, but there was in particular a ton of NFL talent on Miami's team. Virginia Tech won that game 27-20 in overtime. Miami fumbled the ball 6 times.
Edger and James.
And lost 4 of them. Mm-hmm. Each team had 1 interception. Virginia Tech didn't lose any fumbles. Miami lost 4 fumbles. At one point, the Canes turned the ball over on 5 straight possessions. And that's what allowed a Virginia Tech team that had a lot of talent on defense, but not much at all on offense, to win a game 27-20. So, hang your hat there.
I think Al Clark was beat up in that game pretty bad. And,
he broke his foot that game, but stayed in.
And I remember talking to Dwight Vick for a story I was doing on Michael Vick, and Michael was on the side, like begging the coaches to put him in because he was there and in uniform. And what uniform number was he wearing?
18.
Okay, there we go. Chris knew the trivia question before I could even get it out there.
That Miami team had, like, I'm just looking at the box score at wide receiver. Reggie Wayne, 6 catches for 153 yards.
Who's the other receiver?
Santana Moss.
That's some good players. So I was in where was I? I was over at ESPN Radio last week, and Bill Roth is in there before my segment, and he was on the radio saying, he was talking about that game. Basically, he was saying that was at the stage of Edge's career, maybe that he wasn't the most physical back. He was very talented, and Bud Foster told the Tech defense, hit this dude as hard as you can. He will drop the football because he doesn't like to get hit. So by the end of that game, he didn't, like, the Tech defense had worn him out so bad, like, he didn't want any part of him anymore. I think he did rush for a decent number of yards, but he had a lot of fumbles.
17 carries, 96 yards in that. Another guy, just scrolling through the box score, I'd forgotten about this guy. Everybody knows about Nate Webster and hates Nate Webster. Yeah. But a guy they had playing linebacker for them back then that I loved was Dan Morgan.
Yeah, he was awesome. Guy? Played for the Panthers for a long time.
He had 15 tackles in that game, and nobody on Miami had more than 6 after him. That guy was a baller.
Yeah, he was.
I believe it is prediction time. Chris, do you remember what your score was?
38-13, not Virginia Tech.
Yeah, every person on our staff picked Miami.
I'm the negative one this week. Everybody else has got relatively close games. I don't.
I mean, you have a 25-point margin. Will has an 18-point margin. Andy has a 14-point margin. I have a 18-point margin. Nick has a 14-point margin.
Nobody's very positive about this.
Yeah,
I'm the least positive.
Everybody has picked Miami. How do you see this one playing out?
Well, I just think Miami will control it from start to finish. I want to see cleaner play from Virginia Tech. I don't want to be like holding my head in my hands as often. I don't want to have situations where there are 2 zeros on the field. I want to catch every punt cleanly. I want to maybe not turn the ball over for a game, things like that. And that's what I'll be looking for. I'm not holding out hope of a Virginia Tech victory. Right now, to me, like, Tech doesn't even look like a bowl team to me right now. Just how the eye test over 4 games, they don't look like one. The good news is the last time I gave up on a Tech football team, was after 4 games last season, and then they immediately turned around. So hopefully that's what the Hokies have going for them this week, is the Chris Coleman karma. But this Miami team is going to be a much, much different, more difficult matchup than last year's 3-9 Pitt team at the same stage. But so for me, like, really, I want to be a healthier football team after this game. Get through it with no injuries, and the guys that are banged up have an extra week before Stanford, and then you go win that one. Yeah. And then, then you've got 6 games afterwards. Get it turned around.
Or open week after Stanford.
Exactly. Yeah. Get some things figured out then. That's what I'm actually looking more forward to the Stanford game than I am this one for that reason.
Andy, you have Miami 34, Virginia Tech 20.
Yeah, I obviously didn't pick them to win. I picked them to cover in this game, sort of on the theory of things are never as good or as bad as they seem. The fan base is despondent right now. Sometimes when that's the case, it's never quite as bad as people are making it out to be. Now it very well could be. I could look like an idiot come Monday again. But, I think the last time we were talking about them being such big underdogs going down to Miami, and the season's over and this team's horrible, and they go down there and they turn their season around with a win. Like, I don't know if they're going to win this, and I'm clearly not predicting them to, but I feel like this is a kitchen sink game. I think that you throw everything at this one because the season is kind of on the brink in this one. And if they can't do it in this one, I don't know if they can do it later in the season. So I think we'll find out everything we need to know about whether this team is, got some grit in it, to steal a phrase from the previous staff here. If they can actually go down there, if they can actually, people are clamoring for grit at this point. They're like, oh man, remember those great days of grit that they had under Fuente when they went to bowl games and they won 10 games in a season one time? Those halcyon days under Fuente. So no, I'm not predicting them to win this one, but I think maybe they can hang a little bit more than people are giving them credit for.
If they win, I'll wear my grit shirt.
There
I've
we
got
go.
a grit shirt.
Is that a threat or is that a promise? I feel like that's
Hey, Chris, you got to go whole hog. I've got a grit hat over there in the office that you can put on with the grit shirt.
Is that the real grit hat?
and you
though?
should be
I've
eating
got a real
grits
grit shirt.
throughout
real
the
grit.
podcast.
No, you should wear a hard hat. Hard hat
A hard
mentality.
hat with a grit shirt. Yeah.
Will, you have Miami 42, Virginia Tech 24.
So I also have the Hokies covered at 42-24, and I'm telling you, man, I think it's going to go like I was just looking at last year's Florida State game. You remember Florida State came out and led 22-0 at the end of the first quarter, and that final was 39-17. I think a similar thing's going to happen. I think Miami's going to come out and just go pow and take a pretty sizable lead, and then I think they're going to be thinking, man, it's Friday night. Let's get this thing over with. Go down to the clubs, and just go a little nappy nap. And Tech's going to backdoor cover on this one.
It's funny you mentioned that. That was the last time Tech was more than a 20-point dog, and Tech covered that game in Tallahassee by 2 points. Nick has Miami 38, Virginia Tech 24. I have Miami 39, Virginia Tech 21. And one of the stats I included in my preview is Virginia Tech has, or in my prediction, I should say in the preview, since 1987, Virginia Tech has been a double-digit underdog on 11 occasions. It lost all 11 outright, but is 7-3-1 against the spread. So the Hokies are 1-4 straight up again as a double-digit underdog under Pry, but 3-2 against the spread. So
That'll make the fans feel better.
Yeah.
You're going to lose, but you'll cover the
spread. Yeah.
Good chance you cover the
Vegas-
spread. It's like
Vegas-
small victories there.
Spread covering trophy is coming up.
Now, 464 votes in, the fans are picking the Canes to win by 11 plus 84% of people in the game preview. And I've been watching it during the podcast. It's been a solid 84 to 85%. So that's not going to change. And 7% are picking the Hokies to win a close one.
The same 7% pick
Every
Virginia Tech
game.
to win every game, no matter what. So.
And another 7% picked the Canes to win by 1-10. So that's 91% picking Miami to win it.
all right. Anything else you guys want to add on Miami before we wrap up?
I don't think so.
All right. Tomorrow is Thursday. Andy and I are hitting the road bright and early to go down to Miami. You've got an Inside the Numbers
I'll have an inside the number
coming tomorrow. Brandon's got a Miami Scout. Andy, you want to tease a little bit of your Cam Ward,
Yeah, I
Tyron
talked
Jones
to
story?
their quarterback coach, Daryl Colbert Jr. In Houston, kind of a Houston connection there. And you saw all the videos in the summer about them going to Miami and they're on the beach and they're trash talking each other and stuff. It sounds like that's sort of the friendly competition that exists between these guys, and they like riling each other up, and they also like having bragging rights about each other. And Cam Ward beat, when he was at Wazoo last year, beat Shedeur Sanders in Colorado. So he's 1-0 in the matchups of these three guys that this guy coaches, and he very much wants to be 2-0 in this matchup. So just kind of an interesting connection there.
I wanted to add a note that Buy or Sell is currently up on the website. It's been up since yesterday, so go find it on the website. And we've got 5 selections there from Nick Brown, Director of Media. Now, the Buy or Sell video version, we're going to record it right when we're done here, but we're actually not running it till tomorrow. We're spacing it out with the podcast.
Cool. That's what's coming up on TechSideline.com. Thank you to presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company. For Chris Coleman, for Andy Bitter, for Will Stewart, for Nick Brown, I'm David Cunningham. This has been episode 378 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Have a great rest of your week. Safe travels to all of those who are going down to Miami, and we'll talk to you next Monday.